So a couple of days ago, I was looking through Twitter and I saw this.
What?
Wow, a resume just came across my desk with this GitHub contribution chart. We offered him a 500,000-year job without even interviewing. Savor Sauce here. I was going to try and make this into a fully fleshed out explainer video, but the details are so simple that I would rather just demonstrate the code. I'll leave the pre-built binaries for anyone who doesn't want to make this themselves on my Patreon, which I'll link in the description. Alright, so I've got my Python file set up and ready to go, and I've set up a Python virtual environment. As you can see, I'm in the dev environment. So now I am going to list out the requirements by importing them into my Python file. So you need to install all of these using pip install. So I need to import OS. Then I need to import datetime. With tkinter installed, we need to type from tkinter. And from tkinter, we need to import tk, label, and button and file dialog. And we'll also need tk calendar installed, and from tk calendar, we need to import calendar. And we'll also need the git python package, so from git, we need to import repo. The first thing we're going to do is just simply create the tkinter front end. So first we'll set app equal to tk, and we'll set the title to, in this case, git commit creator, but you can put whatever title you want because it doesn't actually matter. First, I'll create a comment named start date calendar, and beneath that comment, I'm going to create a new label with the app provided to it and a text that says select start date. And I'm going to pack it using the .pack with the pad y equal to 5. Now I'll create a new variable for the counter called start calendar, which will be equal to a calendar. I'll provide the app as a parameter like I did before, and I'll put the select mode equal to day because we want to select the day which we are going to be providing it. And next thing I'll do is pack it just like we did the label with the pad y equal to 5. Now I'll do the same for the end date by making a comment that says end date calendar. I'll create another label which is identical to the first one, except the text will instead say select end date instead of select start date. And then I'll pack it with a pad y equal to 5 just like I did the first label. Then I'll add an end calendar, which is just going to be another calendar with the exact same calling or adding an app parameter, and then the select mode should be day. I made the both select modes to be identical, but I think you could do it differently and it would still work. The last thing I need to do is pack it using a pad y equal to 5. Next, we need to add a directory where we're going to select the GitHub repository that we're going to be adding commits to. I'll add a comment that says select GitHub repository. Typing kind of slow. And we'll add a button that gives the app with the text of select GitHub repo. It says GitHub repo, but it's actually a Git repo. And then we eventually push to GitHub. Now I'll need to pack it using a pad y equal to 10 in this case because we're switching from the calendars to a button. We'll add a repo label, which is just a label, and that label is going to be given the app with the text saying no directory selected in the case that there's no directory selected. And we'll need to pack the repo label using a pad y of 5, not 10. It needs to be 5 because it's a label, not a button. Now we need to create the create commits button, so I'm going to create a comment that says create commits. Then beneath that, I'm going to create a button that takes in the app as the frame with which to put the button in, and then text that says create commits. This button is eventually going to trigger a function that creates the commits in the Git repository, but we're not there yet. I'm going to pack it using a pad y equal to 10 because it's a button, not a label. And then I'm going to type in, or I'm going, rather, sorry. we're going to run the main loop now by doing app.mainLoop, which is going to actually run the graphical user interface for our project. Now when we save our Python file and run it using Python, in my case tutorial.py, we actually get our graphical user interface. You can see the calendars that we added, which allow you to select the dates. We also have a select GitHub repository button that lets us select a file or a folder using file dialog, and our create commits button. Now we're going to need to add our functions for the buttons. So our first function we're going to put in the select directory button, which we're going to do by typing command equal to select directory. Sorry for the bad typing. And now we need to actually go and add that function, so let's go do that. So we're going to start writing this new function at the top of our code file, but right below the imports, and it'll be called select directory. And the first thing inside of this function that we're going to write is a comment. And that comment is going to just simply say open a file dialog, or I put open a dialog in this case. And that dialog is going to be used to select our GitHub repository folder. We're going to get this directory by creating a new variable called directory, and then in that variable we're going to use file dialog.askDirectory, which is going to open up a window that lets us select a directory on our system. Then we're going to check if the directory exists by using ifDirectory, and if that directory exists, we're going to set our repo label, which currently as default says no directory selected. We're going to set that text equal to our new directory so that we can actually have visible feedback that a directory was in fact selected. As you can see, I'm typing it out here using a formatted string. Then underneath that, we're going to add a variable called a repo path on our app, and that repo path is going to be equal to the directory that we just made. Now we're going to add our second and final command function, which will be called create commits action. And this function is going to call our other function that we actually create the commits with. So at the top below our previous function, we're going to type in def create commits action. And the first thing we're going to do in this function is get the data from our front end, which in this case the two bits of data that we need is the start calendar and the end calendar. And then we'll also need the directory, but we're not there yet. So first I'll write a comment that says get the selected dates. And the first date we're going to get is the start date, which we'll get by using the start calendar.getDate function. And I will do the exact same thing, but this time it'll be for the end date. The next thing we need to do is convert these dates into specifically formatted datetime objects that are compatible with GitHub. First thing I'm going to do is make a start date, which will be start date equal to datetime.datetime.strptime, and we're going to provide the start date as a parameter. The specific way we need to format it is by doing %m, which is for the month, then a slash, then %d, which is for the day, then lastly %y, which is to get the year part of it. Then we want to extract the date from it. Do the exact same thing again, but this time use the end date as the parameter instead of the start date. Now we need to actually validate the inputs that we just accessed. So first we'll type if not has attribute app and then the repo path. So we need to check if the app has a repo path, and if it doesn't, we need to print to the console that we need to actually select a GitHub repository. The next thing we need to check is if the start date is greater than the end date. And if this is the case, we need to print to the console that the start date must be greater than the end date. Before the end date. And the last thing we need to do is call our actual function we're using to create the GitHub commits. So I'll call create commits, and I'll give the app.repopath start date and last but not least the end date. Now we're going to start writing the last function we need, which is going to be called create commits. And this function is going to take three parameters: the repo path, the start date, and the end date. The first thing in this function we're going to do is initialize the repository by doing repo equal to capital repo using the repo. Now we're going to initialize the current date variable at the start date, and we're going to use a while loop to loop through each day out of all of the dates, and that while will be while the current date is less than or equal to the end date. And for each day in the end date, between the current date and the end date, we're going to create a dummy file. The first thing we'll do is get the file name, which will be a variable called file name with a formatted string that's file underscore and then the current date.txt. Then we'll get the file path, which will be made during os.path.join with the repo path and the file name. Then with that file open, in the write mode as f, we're going to do f.write, and then we're going to put commit for the current date. Now we need to actually stage the changes before we commit them, which I'll write a comment for. We'll do repo.index.add file name. Then we're going to actually set the commit date here, which will be current date.stf time, which is going to be formatted in such a way that we have the year, month, and then the day. Then, since we didn't actually set a different time, I'll just put 12. Now we need to set two environmental variables. First, we'll do os.environ and then get author date, which will be set to the commit date. Then we'll do os.environ, and this time it'll be get commit date, and this will also be set to the commit date. Now we actually need to commit the changes, which we're going to do by doing repo.index.commit, and we need to set a commit message, which in this case will just be commit for, and then I'll put the current date. Then I'll print as a debug that we committed on that file name on that specific date. Now we need to delete that file that we just made by doing os.remove with the file path, and then also I will debug that I removed that file. Next thing we need to do is move to the next day, which we'll do by doing current day plus equals datetime.time delta, and it'll be days equal to 1. The last thing we need to do is actually log that the commits were created successfully. Now that we've finished writing all the code, we can run it by doing python tutorial.py. We get the same graphical user interface as before, but now the buttons actually work. As you can see, we can actually select a folder, and you can see I can look through any folder I want. Then that create commits button is actually working now. After running that code file, I can go check on my GitHub, and I can see that the area for the dates that I set actually has git commits on every single day. You can see that there's one commit per day. Now there's two major issues with this project that I actually fixed on the binaries that are on my Patreon. The first is that it only commits once per day, which means the colors aren't completely green. It's a little bit faded. So if you want that fixed, you can go check out my Patreon. The other issue is that the commit messages aren't very descriptive, and it just says commit for a certain day, which means that if an interviewer actually looks at your commits, they'll see that it's pretty obviously faked. So I also fixed that on my Patreon, so make sure to go check out my Patreon if you want a fully updated version of this. Thank you to everyone who made it this far. This video has been a long time in the making, and I just haven't ever felt up to making it. But here it is now. If you guys enjoyed the video, make sure to like to my video and also subscribe to the channel because it helps out a lot. And let me know in the comments what kind of videos you want to see next.